Thank you all for being here today. My name is Darci Vetter, and I have had the pleasure of serving this year as the diplomat in residence here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with the purpose of helping to launch the Yeutter Institute for International Trade and Finance. And it is just an absolute pleasure for me to see all of you here this afternoon to kick off the inaugural CME Group Foundation Yeutter Institute Symposium. The Clayton Yeutter Institute for International Trade and Finance is the living legacy of Clayton Yeutter, a Nebraska native who held 2 cabinet posts as Secretary of Agriculture and as the U.S. Trade Representative. He also led the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, investing in strong market infrastructure and serving for years on the board of the CME Group. But for me, Clayton was a mentor and a friend, and so it's been just a labor of love to help work on the Institute this year. And Clayton's groundbreaking work in trade policy helped create the framework for today's international trading system, including the World Trade Organization, which continues to guide the work of trade policy makers around the globe. And the goal of the Clayton Yeutter Institute is to prepare students to be active participants and influencers in the roles in international trade and finance, and to help them become leaders on those issues at a time when our world is increasingly interconnected. We also aim through that institute to actively engage the community, which is why it's so fun to see all of you here today, to examine the ways that international trade and finance impact the Nebraska economy, and to partner with you in business and in agriculture to help influence the global economy for the good, the greater good of Nebraska. So today's symposium is our kickoff event for the Institute, and the first big opportunity to introduce ourselves to you, to the university community, and to the broader state of Nebraska. And I couldn't think of better timing for a conference on international trade. International trade policy is certainly in flux these days, and it is clear now more than ever that informed students and prepared trade policy professionals are in demand. So I would like to first thank the CME Group Foundation for their generous gift to the Yeutter Institute, which endows this symposium, which means that today's event is the first of many that will examine issues about how our financial markets impact our world. And I would like to ask Cassie Davis to stand, who is here from the CME Group Foundation. If we could give her a round of applause, please. I would also like to thank Smithfield Foods for their contribution, which has sponsored our delicious meal today, and you will hear more from Smithfield this afternoon. But it is now my distinct pleasure to also introduce some individuals who have joined us today and who are so influential to this institute. And the first is Christy Eider. So Christy, will you stand, please? So Christy was Clayton's partner in marriage and in life, and it was Christy and Clayton who worked together to envision and bring life to the Yeutter Institute. We are so excited to have her here today and to be able to work with her to turn the Institute into the living, breathing thing that we are creating together and to inspire the future trade policy professionals from Nebraska. I would also like to introduce Mike Yanni. Mike Yanni is a longtime friend and confidant of Clayton and has generously endowed one of the endowed chairs for the Yeutter Institute in agricultural economics. So we look forward to working with him as we develop the Institute as well. I would also like to introduce to you Jill O'Donnell. Jill will be joining the Institute in July of this year as its first director. I could not be more excited to have her joining the team. Jill has a very impressive background in international policy. She's worked for Senator Hagel and with NATO to develop a cybersecurity program, and we are so pleased that she will bring her expertise in international policy making and in building coalitions to the Yeutter Institute. And I would like to introduce to you Steve Wellman, our State Director of Agriculture. And while Steve is relatively new to his role as State Director of Agriculture, he is not at all new to the issues of agricultural trade and being an advocate for Nebraska farmers. I've had the opportunity to work with Steve as a trade policy advisor for many years. Steve also joins us today with a proclamation from Governor Ricketts. So Steve, would you like to come forward and read it?
So thank you, Darcy. First of all, Governor Ricketts sends his regrets that he couldn't be here, but certainly we all recognize the interest and the priority that Governor Ricketts has on international trade with his trade missions that he participates in 2 every year since he's been in office, and so he's been a good advocate for agriculture, the state of Nebraska, and trade in general. So I do have a proclamation that the governor signed, and I'm going to present this to Vice Chancellor Boehm. And in the meantime, we'll read this, or I will read it on behalf of Governor Ricketts. So, whereas Nebraska's farmers and ranchers help provide food and fiber for the world, fuel our economy, and lead global markets in output and productivity, the efficiency of modern agriculture has provided this country with surpluses and opportunities beyond imagination. And whereas Nebraska's farms and ranches utilize 45.2 million acres, 91% of the state's total land area, and whereas every dollar in agricultural exports generates $1.22 in economic activities such as transportation, financing, warehousing, and production, Nebraska's $6.4 billion in agricultural exports in 2015 translate into $7.8 billion in additional economic activity. And whereas cash receipts from agriculture contributed over $23 billion to Nebraska's economy in 2015 and 6.1% of the U.S. total, and whereas Nebraska's top 5 agricultural exports in 2015 were soybeans, feed and fodders, beef and veal, corn and soybean meal, and whereas Nebraska's thriving agriculture sector provides jobs across our state, not just for farmers and ranchers, but for scientists, processors, shippers, trucking, and retailers, resulting in 1 in 4 jobs that are dependent upon agriculture. Now, therefore, I, Pete Ricketts, Governor of the state of Nebraska, do hereby proclaim the 13th day of March, 2018, as Agriculture Trade Awareness Day in Nebraska. And I do hereby urge all citizens to observe this day by recognizing the role that agriculture and cross-border trade plays in our lives and economy observance. In witness whereof I hereunto set my hand and cause the great seal of the state of Nebraska to be affixed this 12th day of March in the year of our Lord, 2018. Signed by Secretary of State John Gale and Governor Pete Ricketts.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Steve, and thanks to Governor Ricketts for the proclamation. It is not every day you get to say "whereas" from the microphone, so, but clearly an expression of how important agriculture is to the Nebraska economy and how important trade is to agriculture. And last but certainly not least, as we open things up, I want to take a moment to recognize the staff at the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources who have been so generous with their time in setting up the symposium, and particularly Ms. Jessie Brophy, whose tireless work has made the symposium possible. Jessie, it has been a pleasure working with you. Thank you very, very much. So.